This is the Master Marketer Show, powered by Proofpoint Marketing. Each week, we explore the mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets the top B2B marketers use to drive results. Gain actionable insights, one masterful, revenue-generating success story at a time. Let's get started.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Master Marketer Show. I am super excited today. I've got Dr. Marcus Collins to chat with us about culture. Marcus, you are a professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. You've done a million other things that I'm not going to mention. You're also the author of, as people can see in your background if they're watching, the book For the Culture. And as far as I'm concerned, you are a culture expert. And we're going to really dive deep into your brain about all things culture. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm super stoked to be here and ready to dive in.
Awesome. Well, you know, where I'd love to kick things off is, what do you believe is the connection between culture and brand?
I think it's a very clear connection. But first, we need to start with some definition, right? We need some constructs for which we can build. What is culture? Culture, as I look at it through a Durkheimian lens, Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, he talks about culture as a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do, right? So they're a way by which we identify and establish expectations and acceptability for people like us. Cool. So it's through our culture that we not only identify ourselves, but because of who we are, we see the world a certain way, right? A set of beliefs, ideologies, truths, and stories we tell ourselves about the world that are then manifested in the artifacts that we don, the behaviors that are normative, the language that we use, and then we express it through cultural production, music, film, literature, art, dance, and the like, and brands and branded products. So if cultural production can be an extension or expression of people through brands and branded products, well, what is a brand? Well, there's brand, the verb, to brand, and then there's brand, the noun. To brand, etymologically speaking, is to mark something permanently, like a branding iron, right? And that mark was a mark of ownership. In fact, if you translate the word brand in any Romantic or Germanic language, it translates into mark or marque or mark up, right? So the mark is the mark of ownership, a way by which I signify that belongs to me. And the signifier, that is brand, are used to conjure up thoughts and feelings in the minds or hearts of people relative to a product, company, institution, organization, or person. So brands in and of themselves, they're vessels of meaning. They're signifiers that we can identify. Well, what mediates signification, meaning? That is culture. That is, we translate the world through cultural lenses, right? Is a cow leather? Is it a deity or is it dinner? Well, it depends, because it's all those things, but it depends on who you are and how you see the world through your cultural subscription. So I would argue that brands are vessels of meaning that are translated through our cultural lenses by which we see and translate the world.
I love those definitions. How do you, you'll get a lot of people that think that they can't be, manipulated by marketing, that they can't, that they're better than kind of what you just described. Better or just not susceptible, whatever we wanted to call it. How do you address that?
I'd say they're probably the most easily the most easily influenced by it, because they don't think it exists. And that's the thing, it's like it's what street magicians do, right? It's the art of illusion. Like, you think no one can fool me, like, oh, we got this guy or we got this girl. The same thing goes with marketing and marketing communications. If we don't understand the influence, the forces that are influencing us, then we leave ourselves vulnerable to be influenced by them. But understanding what things are and having language to articulate what they are gives us agency to see it. And, when we realize what these things are, we adopt a set of some humility and go, oh man, even me who studies these things and put things in the world using these strategies and this understanding for some of the biggest brands in the world, even I myself are influenced by them. Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel laureate psychologist, he studies, the way we process mentally, cognitive processes. System 1 and System 2, as he talks about them, through these cognitive heuristics, these cognitive biases that we have. And he says, I'm a Nobel laureate, considered the leading scholar in this very thing. And even he falls victim to them. So for you to think that you are above it, it makes for a very, very, very good customer.
So you, in your book, you talk mostly about consumer culture and how that influences consumer brands and the connection to marketing and all that. What do you say to folks? And again, we focus on B2B. Most of our listeners are in the B2B space. What do you say to those that say, well, B2B is different?
I say, yeah, you're right. Totally. B2B is different. It's a different context for sure. It's just like I feel totally fine telling Eddie Murphy jokes at the bar, but I'll never tell them at church, even with the exact same people. Why? Because the context is different. However, why do I tell jokes? To connect with my people, and that doesn't change. And I think that's sort of the impetus of how this understanding of culture as a vehicle for consumption plays in different contexts, whether it's B2C or B2B, right? There is no external force more influential to human behavior than culture. Full stop. What we wear, how we style ourselves, how we adorn ourselves, the way you wear your hair, if you have it, the car you drive, the phone you use, where you went to school, if you went to school, where you vacation, what you eat, who you marry, if you marry, where you bury the dead, if you bury the dead. Almost every aspect of social living is mediated, governed by our cultural subscription. And it doesn't stop when we're in the grocery aisles, considering what we might buy as consumers. It also influences what we do in our offices, what we do when we're responding to emails, or when we're getting pitched, or we're pitching other people. We're good marketers, that is, we are appealing to humanity, the underlying physics that govern why we do what we do. And the better we understand that, realizing that the governing operating system of humanity is culture, the more we realize that, the better we realize that we're able to leverage those things and put them to work, apply them to the context that is B2B. And we know this intuitively because what do we do to when we're in client services and we're trying to sell things to clients? What do? We need to take them out to dinner. We need to go play golf with them. We need to take them out of the context of quote unquote business and speak to the humanity of them, so that when we're on the phone with them, trying to pitch them a thing, we know who they are. We know how they see the world. We know what they believe. We know what they're afraid of. We know the things that matter to them based on who they are. We know these things intuitively. B2B, B2C, B2G, right? Business to government. They're all P2P. They're all people to people. They're humans. And what governs humanity is our cultural subscription. So understanding this becomes extremely powerful despite the context in which you use it.
So I want to read you a quote I wrote down from the book, and I'd love to ask you a question about it. So hopefully I don't butcher this. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down right. So you say, instead of trying to create a community around you, perhaps you'd be better off trying to find the people who already believe what you believe and facilitate the network that connects them. So in the context of B2B, what we see a lot right now is this movement of community-led growth as a go-to-market motion.
Yeah.
Now, I forget the whole blank-led growth thing. Where I see a lot of it is, well, they're actually doing the opposite of what you say, which is, well, no, let me build a community around what I do. So I'd love to maybe, I don't know if you have an example you can think of, but how would you put this community-led growth movement, if you will, in context of this quote.
Sure. Okay. So let's start with the sort of the argument that's being made. The argument that it's making is that for long, marketers have used the sales funnel as a way to reach people. We're going to speak to as many people as possible, prayerfully reach 20% of them, and God willing, we can convert 0.012% of them. That's been our approach. That's the sales funnel, the marketing funnel. That's what we've been doing for over a century now. And intuitively, that makes sense. We're going to reach a lot. We're going to talk to a lot of people, maybe reach a few. Hopefully, they become considerations, and then consideration converts. Now, while that may be efficient, it's not terribly effective. It's actually quite wasteful. Not only that when we're talking about the people we're trying to reach, is typically noisy. A lot of people are trying to reach them as well, right? So it becomes cluttered, saturated, and therefore we have to spend more money to cut through. Well, what do we know about humanity? What actually influences us the most is people. And I know that is like, marketers do not want to hear this, right? That is a sobering fact, right? People trust people more than any form of marketing communication, more than print, out of home, radio, television, native. We trust people. In fact, we trust strangers more than we trust marketers. That's why we rely on Amazon ads, right? So the idea of leveraging community-led growth, or leveraging the voice of other people, is because the voice of other people are more influential than the voice of any marketing communications, right? So then the idea then is, okay, so, all right, I get that, but why can't I just use the voice of other people with regards to my value propositions? A razor sharper, battery lasts longer. Well, what gets people to move has less to do with functionality, rationality, and everything to do with emotions, right? The part of the brain that's associated with behavioral adoption is the same part of the brain that's associated with emotions. We know this intuitively. We call it gut instinct. We call it intuition. I felt it in my gut, so I did a thing. Well, actually, you felt it in your limbic system. And your limbic system is associated with both feelings and behavior, and you act accordingly. And then we rely on rationality to justify it. And rationality sits in a different part of the brain associated with our neocortex, right? And so is articulation. So it's easy for us to articulate the rational, hard to articulate the emotional. So we typically talk in data-driven language. But by and large, we're influenced by our what we feel. So when marketers appeal to who we are, what we feel, what we believe, there's a higher likelihood of getting those people to move, and they go preach the gospel, not because of what you are, but because of who they are. An example, I talk about this in the book, would be GE. Right? So GE actually has 3 business contexts. They are a B2C company, they're a B2B company, and they're a B2G company, right? So they run the gambit, right? And they're different business units. And a few years back, General Electric, GE, did a campaign called "What's the Matter with Owen?" And the idea is this: GE as a company believes in inventing the future. Right? Thomas Edison, one of the founders, he believed that whatever he goes out in the world, finds what the problems are, and he solves it through invention. That is, if you want the future, you invent it. You make the future. That's what they believe. They've been communicating that with GE. We bring good things to life. GE, imagination at work. Right? So this campaign was not to communicate its products. It was an HR play. This was about recruiting employees. And the premise was this: Owen is a new employee, a new hire at GE, but no one understands what Owen does. He goes home and says, I'm working at GE, and his parents go, great, you're going to work on train systems. And he's like, well, no, I'm actually building the systems on which train systems are ran. And their parents are like, what are you doing? Their friends don't get you. Your people don't get you. But GE, we do, because we see the world the way you do, Owen. You want to invent the future, and so do we. And it shows a series of vignettes of Owen not being understood by his people, but GE saying that we get you, right? Which is why he works there. In the 18 months that campaign ran, they saw an 800% increase in job applications. They didn't say anything about what your salary might be, what your 401k would be, the location you're going to be stationed. None of those value proposition driven things. This was all about shared ideology, shared belief, the anchor of culture. And it drove considerable increase in job applications, getting people to move, which is the core function of marketing. So we could see this in a non-business to consumer setting, in a B2B, which is HR is a B2B function, right? It is a non-consumer driven function. It drives people to adopt behavior. We see the same thing in politics. We see the same thing in leadership. We see the same thing in consumption. And we see the same thing in day-to-day life, because it's not predicated on the context. It's predicated on what makes us human.
Well, and you've just given me a really awesome transition point that I want to ask you about, which is internal culture. So, there's a typical, I don't know if it's a quote, but if you don't build culture, one will be created for you. Right?
That's right.
So, how do you think about that? And maybe take this GE example as the context.
Sure. The thing about culture is that it's manifested through consumption, right? We make our culture material by the things that we consume, right? They become identity projects for ourselves to communicate who we are, even in an organizational sense, right? I wear the swag from my company because they are identity marks of who I am, right? I'm proud to work here. If you hate your company, you're not walking around with the fleece from your company. It ain't happening, right? Because you don't feel like it is an extension of who you are. So not only are there identity markers as a way of saying who we are, because of our identity is associated to this thing, we therefore act in concert with people like ourselves in an effort to promote social solidarity. So within the organization, we say, okay, we are company blue. What do we believe? Because of what we believe, we therefore exercise our belief through artifacts, behaviors, language, and express it through cultural production. That is, our social facts, our way of life, how we do things around here are meant to be outward expressions of inward beliefs. So as an organization, you ask ourselves, well, what do we believe? And is our way of life a true reflection of it? For instance, I do a lot of like executive education work here at Ross, and I work with with companies in a very intimate level, right? So like tailored project or tailored programs for companies, and I ask them, for instance, what do you believe? And we say, oh, innovation. Innovation is important. Innovation, great. And I go, what are the stories that you tell within your company, particularly about innovation? And the majority of those stories are hero stories where people succeeded. They had this idea and they pitched it to their manager bought into it, and they put it in the market, and voila, success. Those are the stories that are told. But what the company was seeing is that there wasn't a ton of innovation happening. And they go, what's going on here? We believe that innovation is important, but why isn't it happening? And I said, well, one problem I hear is the stories you're telling. You're telling success stories. Innovation requires a high tolerance for risk. And if the only thing that you hero is success, then you are telling people do not fail. Failure is not acceptable here. We don't prop up failure. Failure is not a part of the folklore. And therefore, people are less inclined to take risks. Instead, you should be telling risk stories, failure stories. Hey, Mike had this great idea and man, it bombed. Well, why are we excited about this? Because Mike took a risk. And actually, because of that risk, we learned. And when you tell stories like that, people feel not only safe to take risks, but they also feel encouraged to do it. And we know intuitively from everything we know about innovation that it requires some disposition for risk taking, some semblance of that we're willing to take a chance on something. And something as little as the stories that the company were telling were fortifying behaviors that were antithetical to the belief. So this idea of culture is not only manifested in what we buy as a way of acting in concert with people like us. It also manifests in the organizations we're a part of as a way of achieving social solidarity by acting in concert with people like us, whether it's our professional organizations, our social groups, our families, our religions, and the like.
I love the way you describe it, because one of the things I consistently talk about with our clients as we're talking to them is, people don't build relationships directly to brands. They build affinity to brands through their relationships with people, ideas, and groups. And everything you just described, all these stories you told, is completely reflective of just that, right? And groups is a pretty broad term. That could be, internal groups within the organization. It could be the broader organization itself. It could be external groups, etc. Ideas. That's, what do we believe?
That's right. And even the quote that you mentioned, like if you don't establish a culture, it will establish one in itself. Essentially saying if you aren't intentional about establishing what do we believe, establishing our shared way of life, establishing our cultural production, then the community, the people who are in it, they're going to do it for you. That is, they're going to say, hey, the boss said that we need to do this, but the boss says that quitting time is at 5, but like we all got here at 4:30. This is what we do. The boss says, hey, know this, but this is what we do around here. And if you aren't intentional about first establishing the beliefs and then the way by which those beliefs are manifested, then the people will make their own way of life. And that way of life may be out of sync with your beliefs, definitely, in most cases, going to be out of sync with your desires.
So let's play out a hypothetical here. Let's say you are working with a leadership within an organization where culture has gotten away from them. They've not been intentional.
Yep.
What do you advise them to do from a mindset perspective? Like how do they go into the process of, quote unquote, fixing this problem?
Yep. You first take inventory of the culture. Well, I guess the very first thing is having an understanding of what culture is. It's a word we use so flippantly. It's in some cases as marketers, it's typically a shortcut for popularity. In organizations, it's sort of it's a proxy for policies. We have a foosball table in the kitchen. We have a great culture here, and because we don't have a great understanding of it, we don't have a great Rosetta Stone to talk about it, and therefore we don't have much agency to operationalize it. So the first is like let's agree on language, on what culture is, and then let's take inventory of our culture through that lens. And what we find,
I want to interrupt you just really quickly.
Yeah,
I know you already defined it in the very beginning.
Yeah.
But define it one more time.
Yeah. It's the system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and what people like us do. And it's through this system that we make meaning of the world, right? It's the system. What's acceptable behavior? Like, first of all, because of who we are, what do we believe? And because of what do we believe, what do we wear? What are our behaviors? What are our language? And how do we express them through cultural production? Stories, folklore, music, literature, and the like, and brands and branded products, by the way. So the first thing is like, all right, if that is culture, great. So culture is the system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what we do. Awesome. What are our systems? Well, what do we believe? I mean, put some leaders in a room and ask them to define the belief of the company. You go, whoa. I thought we were all reading from the same hymnal here. What's going on? What's going on? Right? You find there's so much heterogeneity in the way that the shared belief, in big air quotes, is articulated. You go, oh, that's problem number one. We haven't even defined what this thing is, right? And I talk about this in the book. Like REI is a great example of this. REI, had a coming together of leadership, and the CEO Jerry Skriskli said, what do we believe? And they said in unison, we believe that a life outdoors is a life well spent. He said, great. Whew. I'm glad we're on the same page there. Now, if that be the case, then why are our doors open on Black Friday when the majority of the country has the day off? And someone says, well, because that's when we go from the red to the black. That's why we call it Black Friday. We make a lot of money that day. And he goes, yeah, sure, I get that. But if we believe that life outdoors is life well spent, then we should be encouraging people to go outside, not go indoors and shop, right? And while that may be antithetical to the business model, it might be antithetical to the fiduciary responsibility of the company. It was in line, it was congruent with how they see the world, the foundation, the cornerstone of culture. So they were willing to forego economic gain to be in lockstep with who they are. That is, their behaviors as an organization, their kinetics as an organization was more important, that was demonstrative of its belief system than it was to make a whole bunch of money right now. And what happened when they do that? Not only does everyone get on board, like, all right, this is why we're here, and we are acting in concert, in lockstep in that happening, but they actually inspired other companies who saw the world similarly to close their doors on Black Friday. And no less, they inspired municipalities in states across the country who normally would have their national parks closed, because 25 states actually observe Black Friday as a national holiday, surprisingly. Would have their state parks closed. They opened it up so people could go out and play, inspiring other people around them to behave. And REI experienced the highest Black Friday weekend sales they've ever experienced. Unbelievable. And that idea, that spark of an idea, came out of REI saying, what do we believe? Now let's take inventory of how we behave based on that belief system. And that's what I would do with companies. That's what I do with companies. What do you believe? How do you see the world? Awesome. Talk to me about your artifacts. Talk to me about the behaviors, the social norms, the unwritten rules. Talk to me about your language. Talk to me about the cultural production, what are the stories you tell. When these things are out of sync, that's when the culture gets wobbly. But when they are congruent, what happens is that the people who are in the boat, the believers, they get in line. And the people who are not believers, they leave. And amen to both of them.
What I find amazing is that internal culture, especially when like times are tough, kind of goes by the wayside. Even though if you really connect the dots and do the math, it is probably one of the biggest predictors of maybe not short term, but medium and long term financial success. That's because right. If your people believe it, if they believe the work, they believe in the work, they believe in the vision, they believe in the mission, they believe in the values and everything that you just talked about, they will do better work. They will do great work. And then they will get other people to believe it externally. And right. It just cascades.
I mean, we know this intuitively. We know this so well. But as soon as we get into a business setting, we take off our human hat and put on our business hat. And our business hat seems to forget everything about humanity. But you're right. I mean, it's such a predictor of success that, I mean, this is how small businesses, this is how startups start. They're 2 people, 3 people, 4 people sitting around the table. No one's making money. In fact, they're actually losing money, losing their shirts. But they're all there because they believe. And they put all their effort, all their time, all their social capital into this thing because they believe. There's nothing material at the moment, but there's a shared belief. The challenge is that when the company gets bigger, the people who join the organization get further and further away from the evangelists, the preachers of said gospel. And they start showing up just for the value propositions. Oh, it looks good on my resume. Oh, they have a great 401k. Oh, they pay well. Oh, their retirement policy is great. Their vacation policy is awesome. But as soon as you hit hard times, they're the first to be out. The people, though, who believe go, oh man, like this thing is an extension of me. This isn't just a job. This is my family. This is my home. And even though they're not of the same blood and they're not technically family, you feel that connected, not because you work together, but because you share a same belief system. We see it on the battle lines in military. We see it in teams on the court or on the field. We see it within our friends, within our communities, and our work. Professionalism is just another institution by which we engage in this thing that we call humanity.
So, taking it one step further, what do we believe? That's the mindset we got to go into this with, is defining it, taking inventory of it. I think a lot of companies are good at that part after they realize they have the problem. And they'll define it, they'll create a pretty deck and posters, and they'll do a presentation. Okay. But how do you, if that's all you do, that'll last for a week and then everything goes away. So, what are the skill sets required from a leadership perspective to really not just live it, but disseminate it in a way so that everybody else believes in it and lives it?
Yeah. So, how do we go from platitudes to something meaningful? I mean, the first thing is that we think about these things as not just like you talk about what is the brand purpose. No. Those things are fleeting. I think what this is about conviction. Is I'm convicted, and I always talk about. I never use the phrase brand purpose because a lot of people have purposes they don't live up to, right? But conviction, it connotes action. Like to be convicted is to stand for something, right? So as a leader, the first skill is conviction. What are you convicted about? And are you willing to stand for it? It requires bravery. That like, even though the short term, this might be good for us, does it go against who we actually are? And that ability to have discipline in that courage is what creates the model by which people use to keep themselves plumb. Like the leader, I would say, like leaders don't make the culture. They don't establish the culture. What they do is they establish, they model the culture. And the idea is that by modeling the culture, people see it in action. And then the community, the people within the company, they negotiate and construct, whether it's legitimate, whether they're going to do it or not. So not only does leaders need to be good at being convicted, being disciplined, they also need to be really good at preaching the gospel. Like I think Simon Sinek put it this way, that like the CEO shouldn't be the chief executive officer; it should be the chief evangelist officer. That you should be the one preaching the gospel, so that everyone knows why we're here. And as being a good evangelist, and you don't have to be the best speaker. You don't have to be Martin Luther King. You don't have to be that. You just have to be sincere in the way you deliver. It has to feel like you believe it, and it's delivered in a way that is sincere. And in that sincerity requires being empathetic. It requires help understanding how people are translating it and how it is manifesting what they do, and what are the pain points that keep people from tripping up, or that keep tripping up people rather.
So you've worked for and with a lot of big name organizations and individuals. I'd love to hear a story about what's the best example of what you just described that you've seen.
The best example. I mean, I've seen quite a few. I'll be honest. You know what? I give a lot of credit to State Farm. So State Farm is an insurance company. Nothing sexy about insurance. And if we want to be very honest, all insurance companies, they use the same actuary tables. So they are legit parity. Like they are by definition parity. Right? The actual foundation of what their business their product offering is exactly the same. The one is just more risk tolerant or risk loving than the other. And in this world of parity, State Farm, you said, what do we believe? State Farm had been, in the conversation, the discourse about, cutting costs. We're cheaper, we're cost competitive, etc. They weren't cheaper, but they were trying to be cost competitive. And we said to them, why don't you talk about what you believe? What do we believe? Well, State Farm believes in helping people live life more confidently every day. So they make better decisions. That's why they exist, to help people make better decisions so they live life more confidently every day. And they do that by having expert agents, 18,000 expert agents around the country to be there for you when you need them, however you need them. They just so happen to sell insurance. They so happen to sell financial services, right? But why they do it is much, much more powerful. And once State Farm got their mind around that, they said, oh, we've been doing this all wrong. They said, yeah. So because of how State Farm sees the world, they were there to help people live life more confidently every day. State Farm decided to look at agents not as, not as salesmen, but agents are magical. They're there whenever you need them to help you. And we created the campaign, Like a Neighbor, State Farm is there, magic jingle, and the agent shows up. A manifestation of what it's like having someone who is skilled on your side. We later did that. I did that work with Chris Paul, where we had his alter ego Cliff Paul, who two twins separated at birth. One went on to be an all-star basketball player, Chris Paul. One went on to be an all-star State Farm agent, Cliff Paul. Cliff Paul isn't real, but that was sort of the premise of the campaign. And if you look at all of State Farm's marketing communication over the last almost over a decade, right? I worked on it over a decade ago. It's all been about helping people. That's all State Farm is here to do, is to help people. It's in their communication. It's in their behavior. It's in in the product offering, that they believe that they're there to help people live life more confidently every day by making better decisions. And it informs everything that the company does. And anyone who touches State Farm knows that to be the truth.
So what about from a leadership perspective? Who's a leader that you, let's say, admire for how they've built and modeled and disseminated culture within their organization?
So I've got to say, and I'm biased because I work with them. There's Morgan Flatley. She is the global CMO of McDonald's. And in my experience, when you work with CMOs, there is a power dynamic that is very clear. They may be our partners, but like the CMO makes the decision. But working with Morgan Flatley has been so interesting because I've never seen a CMO be as vulnerable as her. Her level of vulnerability makes it so much easier for us to talk to her, but gives our teams permission to be ignorant. It gives our teams permission to say, I don't know if this is going to work. Help me. And as a partner, as an agency partner, when I was with the agency, it allowed us to be better partners to her. It allowed the organization to feel much more human, and allowed people to not only express where they were anemic, but it also created space for people to say, well, I know that. Right? I can speak up there. I can't speak up here, but I can speak up there, which made more people feel like they had agency in the organization. And the marketing function at McDonald's over the last 4 or 5 years have been tremendous. I mean, you see it in the market response, like their business is through the roof. But the people who work there, they feel like they have so much more ownership of the work. They feel like they're a part of something, right? And Morgan, as then the North American CMO, now global CMO, she was instrumental in doing that. And people who came to work at McDonald's at a time when McDonald's wasn't popping, by the way. Like, it wasn't like I want to work at McDonald's was like I'm going to work at Netflix. It was not the hot thing at the time. But they came to work there because they wanted to work for Morgan. And Morgan, as a leader in her times at Pepsi and beyond, that's just how she leads. She leads from a place of humanity. And that operating system that's in her belief, how she sees the world, it resonates, it reverberates into the entire marketing function. So much so, and this is like the best part about it, that so much so as she gets elevated to global CMO, the new North American CMO, Tariq Hassan, her predecessor, not predecessor, Yeah, her predecessor, right? No, I'm saying that wrong. The person following her, brain fart there, continues to lead an organization similarly. Continues to lead an organization with humanity. Continues to lead an organization with the same level of vulnerability, and as a result, the organization, the function within McDonald's continues to abide. And I think that's what's important. The legacy that you leave.
Yeah, another thing I appreciated about the book is you talked about cults as a manifestation of culture, and I think you very eloquently connected that to internal cultures. I believe you mentioned Apple in particular, but
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, cults are short for culture. We say that companies, we say those companies, that company has a cult-like following. What we mean is that the cultural characteristics of the company are salient within a group of people who, even if they're not in the company, they adhered or they relate to and connect to the beliefs, and then therefore they too practice social solidarity by adhering to the cultural facts. I mean, say anything disparaging about Elon Musk on Twitter. I can't even say the word X. The platform formerly known as Twitter. They're like, yo, the Elon Musk fans are going to get you, right? Because supporting him is a way by which they practice their cultural subscription. So when companies have cult-like following, it's that the culture is so salient that if you're one of us. And when I started working for Apple, I felt like an Apple employee. I felt like I was a part of it, and I was a fanboy in some ways as a consumer. But when I joined the company, it really became a part of my identity. And as a result, because I identified with it, I therefore ensured that I stayed in lockstep with the cultural characteristics, the social facts, what it means to be an Apple guy. I follow the same program for everyday living. And that's the power of culture, not only in our professional organizations, but in the way that we vote, the way that we worship, and what we wear, what we do, in every aspect of social living.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because we tend to make fun of people who, in like their LinkedIn profiles, or say ex Google, ex Apple, whatever. But the reality is that maybe isn't the thing they should be putting out there, but they're putting it out there for a reason.
That's right.
Which is they're fanboys, for lack of a better
That's
word,
right.
or girls.
That's right.
Right.
It either is an extension of their identity, and they want to communicate that, or they know that when you see it, there's certain cognitions and affects that flood in your mind that you now fix to them. And that's the important part about like identity projects. It's the important part about ways by which we peacock our culture like a peacock. We sort of show who we are, because it's really about shared meaning. That when I do a thing, when I wear a thing, when I talk a certain way, it's in a code that other people understand, and we agree that this is cool. I mean, if you drive a fancy car, we spend that money for the fancy car, not just because of its functionality, but so that that I know that when you see it, that this was expensive. It's the shared meaning. But if the car no longer means that, then it's not as valuable anymore. And the same thing goes with companies, right? Like if your company is marred in scandal, maybe ex Twitter employee doesn't feel as interesting anymore, considering what has happened to Twitter. But now, actually, pre X, it probably didn't feel as valuable. Now, post X, the rebranding, it probably actually has a different meaning now. That you were a vestige of the good days, and therefore there's value associated to you based on that shared meaning.
Yep. Yeah, man. Watching this whole thing play out is fascinating right now.
To say the least.
It's gonna be a case study in one way, shape, or form.
Oh yeah.
In most business schools, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I'm already prepared for it for the fall.
So we talked about mindset in terms of really taking inventory of what do you believe in. We talked about skill sets in terms of modeling the behavior, modeling the culture from a leadership perspective. What about tool sets? And I use the word really broadly here in terms of, I'm not talking about tech stack necessarily.
Sure. Yeah.
But what are the tools that are, again, necessary to, again, we specifically want to focus on internal culture for purposes right now, like to really make it stick and work. And, a great example that I love that you brought up is the McDonald's one, where the next leader that came in continued on that, right? That doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think what's important, the most important skill is empathy. It's the most important skill. The ability to see the world through lenses that aren't your own, right? Self-aware, perspective taking. And it seems kind of trivial when you say it. Just be empathetic. Okay, great, I could do that. No. Empathy, I mean, it is a great skill because when it's at its best, it requires you to deny yourself. It requires you to say, I see it this way, but that doesn't matter right now. This makes me feel this way, but that doesn't matter right now. What it is seeing the world through the eyes of someone else, right? And at its core, the world is not objective; it's subjective. Right? Things aren't the way they are the way that we are, right? For some, a cow is leather. For others, it's a deity. For some, it's dinner. Which one is it? Depends on who they are and their cultural subscription. The same thing goes in companies. You may say, I just said it this way. That's not how they experienced it. Right? And understanding that people's experiences are just as subjective as our tastes are. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, or meaning's in the mind of the interpreter. And being able to not only understand that truth, but to be able to see the world through someone else's lenses and understand they make meaning, set aside your own dispositions and say, to me, that actually sounds kind of stupid, but I can see why that's important to you. And here's how I can help. And I love it, like, in the Buddhist religion, not Buddhist, but what I know of the Buddhist religion is that, empathy is the precursor, but it is, as an antecedent, it's the next step to compassion. And compassion is empathy in action. They're like, I see the world through your lens. I see there's an issue. I see that there's something going on. Now I'm going to do something about it. And for culture to be at its highest fidelity possible, it requires us not only seeing the world through other people's lenses, but having the wherewithal to do something about it within the broader community. When we're doing that, we're not only taking care of each other, but we're helping establish a muscle memory so that when someone comes in, we can go, oh, no, we don't do that around here. And even when you have to say it, people experience it because it's so salient, right? There's no culture book at Apple that this is what we do. No. When you get there, you go, oh, I see how things work around here, and therefore I. But that's the most important skill: empathy and compassion, putting self-aware perspective taking into action.
It's interesting you brought up culture book. So we're a small organization. We do have a culture book, but something that I like what you're mentioning is, which goes back to modeling and all that. It's consistently coming back and showing, hey, this was an example of this value. This was an example of this principle. I mean, we literally just before I got on with you, we were on our weekly team meeting, and my wife and business partner, who's also our CXO, walked everybody through, hey, here's an example. And it also actually goes back to your failure thing you mentioned early on. It was something we all screwed up with. And it actually started with the leadership side of things. And we said, hey, here's an example of what not to do. And here's why, because here's what we say we're going to do.
Yeah.
And this was not an example of that. And here's the outcome of not following through on this.
Yeah. So what you're doing, as the literature would say, is that you are renegotiating and constructing the culture. Zappos. I don't know if they still do that, but I used to do this when Tony Shea was with us, still alive. They'll do a culture book, and the culture still stays the same. There's like 10 values that they hold. It stays the same, but what they would do is they would get new quotes from employees about that culture, about those values being manifested and what it means to them. So much like you in your company, Mike, you're finding new stories, new narratives. These are new interpretations or new translations, articulations of the culture, such that you're building a repository of folklore. You're building a repository of text that helps express the culture, the beliefs, the artifacts, behaviors, language as cultural production, such that when people join here, it just becomes that much more material, that much more tangible, right? So you're not like every year, let's rethink the culture, like let's change things in the culture. Rather, it's this is what we believe. Let's make sure that we're staying true to it. And here are the ways by which we evidence that. Here are the proof points that suggest that we're on point, or that we got some work to do.
So we talked about mindsets, talked about skill sets, talked about tool sets. You technically already gave a story of results. My favorite example of all the ones you mentioned actually is from a marketing perspective is the REI example, right? Because it really shows that connection between internal culture and external culture and the impact on top line, bottom line, everything all the way through. What do you have another example that's like that? I'd love to hear another one.
Yeah, I think about Google, another client. So, just like I'm just shouting out all my clients here, but let's talk about Google for a moment. Google as a brand, believes in an idea that the access and distribution of information will help us be more productive, make for a better world, right? I paraphrase it, but that's the idea. And Google Pixel, that is the sub brand of Google, their phone, believes that like having this productivity, we can make progress, right? All about progress. And because they believe that, Google invested 5 years of their resources, time, talent to improve the phone's camera. Not like the megapixels. No, not that. Not like the value propositions that people typically focus on when it comes to cameras. Instead, Google realized that technology for a long time had been racially discriminatory. Right? Cameras were based on the Shirley card, which is essentially it's the color tones in which cameras pick things up, and it is predisposed the technology to focus on people with lighter skin, right? People with darker skin, they either showed up overly saturated, too dark that was not representative of who they are, or blotched out, not representative of who they are. And considering that, people need to feel seen to feel like they exist. And Google as a brand, Google Pixel in particular, felt like they weren't making progress if we don't make progress on this thing, help people be seen. So they took 5 years of their effort, their time, etc., technology, to build this technology they call Realtone. And we launched it for Google in 2021. And while the market share on the phone isn't great, the technology of Realtone has not only completely changed how Google thinks about the products in which it brings to market, it's changed the way employees think about what they do. And what we heard from the CMO, Lorraine, she says, hey, first of all, thank you for the work. And we loved working with our team. She said, a lot of people feel really proud to work at Google today because of that. Feel proud because the work that they're doing is more than just value proposition led. It's more than just widgets. It's more than just shipping technology. It exists as something far greater, which brings to mind what's known as the bricklayer's parable. And the idea is this. If I see you on the side of the road, Mike, laying bricks, I go, Mike, what are you doing? You go, I'm laying bricks, Marcus. Cool. Mike has a job. He lays bricks. He's a bricklayer. But if I see you on the side of the road laying bricks, I go, Mike, what are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm building a church. Oh, that Mike has a career. You build churches. But if I'm driving down the street and I see you laying bricks, I go, Mike, what in the world are you doing? You go, I'm building the house of God. That Mike has a calling. Which Mike is more excited about coming to work every day? The one with the calling or the one with the job? And the idea of this belief, this North Star that is the gravitational pull of not only why we're here, but directs where we go, that the products become better fit for the market. It changes the perspective that influences not only that product, but all the suite of products that are offered. But it also makes the people inside the organization feel much more connected. And as a result, they work better together.
So I was going to end it right there, but you just brought something up I'd love to dig into if you still have the time.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it's something I personally struggle with, and from a philosophical perspective, this concept of, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, and purpose and meaning, etc. So on the one hand, what you just described with the bricklayer parable, right, that totally makes sense. I agree. Do you think that everybody that works in an organization can have that? Let's start with that.
Is it possible biologically? Yes. Yes, it is possible. Is it realistic? Maybe not. They're always outliers. If we think about the population statistically, it is a bell curve. It's the normal curve. And the majority of people are going to be normal in the middle, and there are going to be people on the ends, the fringe. It's always going to happen, right? It's always it's just how things are. And therefore, the majority of people can be a part of the thing, and other people not so much. So we get 100%. And I think the idea here is that you as the company aren't the ones going to influence people to get in line. It's going to be the people who do that. And if you can get the majority of people on board, the majority of people will influence the people who are on the sides. And the laggards, the ones who are totally fringe, they won't stick around long because they won't feel like they belong. They'll go find somewhere else to be miserable. No, they go find somewhere else where they feel much more like they belong. And maybe those companies are all transactional in nature, right? And then you have to deal with the marketplace conditions of transactional relationships with employees. It's just a job. It's a 9 to 5. At 9 o'clock, I show up. At 4:59, my chair is spinning, right? Like that's the level of engagement that you get. But I think it's possible. It's just very, 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 very difficult. Therefore, does it feel as realistic?
Yep. I think that ties everything together really well, going back all the way to, again, taking inventory, having purposefully building and influencing, if you will, that culture. And then it all kind of goes from there. Yeah, you're not going to get everybody, but the people that want to be there, that's okay.
And that's exactly how you got to think about it. Same thing with the market. You're not going to convince everyone to buy your product, and that's okay. Even Jay-Z said it ain't for everybody, and that's okay.
Yep, I think that's a perfect place to stop. Everybody that's listening, watching, if you haven't read the book, highly recommend it. Great read, and has some really important lessons for all of us, I think, as marketers. Marcus, one last thing maybe to leave people with is, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this thing that we call culture, what would it be?
Yeah.
As marketers?
That it's a cheat code. It is the most influential external force on human behavior. The better we understand it, the more likely we are to get people to move. And the ones who don't understand it are the more likely to be influenced by it.
Awesome. Well, Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, we will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Master Marketer Show. We'll be back next week with more B2B marketing success stories. Visit our website, www.proofpoint.marketing, for the full episode library complete with show notes, guides, templates, and more. Make sure to follow Proofpoint Marketing on LinkedIn and YouTube so you never miss an episode. Listen every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.